This is absolutely amazing. We have Olga Pierce from ProPublica here to talk about what amazing things they're doing. So big shout out for her. Woohoo! Okay, so she's our next speaker, Olga.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for sticking around. I know toward the end of the day it can get a little misty, but I'm here to talk about some of the projects we're working on. I think I'd like to walk you through some things and then exploit you all as sort of a captive focus group to help us improve what we're doing going forward. For those of you who don't know, ProPublica is an investigative journalism. All right, is this better?
Yes.
All right. So ProPublica is a nonprofit investigative journalism newsroom. We produce our own investigations, and then part of our mandate is to share them. So we also give our stories away to other media outlets. Sometimes they just take them wholesale, and sometimes we partner with other outlets like Frontline or NPR to produce our work. I am Olga Pierce, as you may have gathered, and I've been at ProPublica for a few years. And part of my specialty at ProPublica are projects that involve a lot of involvement from readers and participation from ordinary folks. And that's sort of how I got brought into this project that we're undertaking on patient harm. So the first thing that I want to show everybody, good, we're live up there, is the way that journalism is often done. You know your whole story, you've reported it out, and then at the last minute you're like, oh crap, I need someone who lives in Alabama who is an amputee. And you have to hope that whatever that person's experience is, it matches what you wanted to say anyway. And if you are especially stressed, you might even massage it a little bit to fit what you wanted to say. And what we're trying to do is develop something that is the opposite of that. How do we bring people in at the very beginning so that we get the full story from the outset instead of, knowing what we want to say and not really listening to people. So the first thing we've undertaken is our ProPublica Harm Facebook group. If you guys aren't members, it would be wonderful for you to join. One of the things that happens if you're a journalist and you write about healthcare is that you hear from a lot of people. And some of them are people that you'll be able to maybe focus on in a story, but a lot of them won't necessarily fit what you're working on, or sometimes you write a story about lupus, for example, and then afterwards you hear from a lot of people who would have been excellent sources for a story on lupus, but you just wrote that. So we wanted to find a way for victims of harm and people who are concerned about harm and people whose loved ones have been harmed to not just talk back and forth with us, but to also talk to each other. So we started this Facebook group. Looks like we're at 994 members, so hopefully any day now we'll hit 1,000. And you can see there's a lot of discussion here. People will post articles that they found that were interesting. There have been some raging debates. People will post resources. A lot of people come on with questions. The hospital told me they can't give me my records because of HIPAA laws. Is that true? And we were worried at first that it would just be like crickets, or that we would have to, kind of try to push people into contributing and discussing all the time, but it really has taken on a life of its own. It has inspired our reporting. It's given us new directions to pursue. And it seems like for at least some of the people in the group, it's also a meaningful exercise on their own, regardless of what we might do with the information later. And this Facebook group was so successful that we decided to start our own patient safety page, which you can sort of see here. See if I can get it to. There we go. That's better. Sorry, so it's ProPublica.org /series/patient-safety. And what we've tried to do, we're not sure at this point who's going to come read this page. Is it going to be people who care very personally about patient safety and the problems of patient harm? Is it going to be sort of a broader general audience who aren't personally connected to the issue, first degree, but are just interested in it? Is it going to be people who just like a good story? We're not sure at the moment. This has been up for about a week, I guess. So it's still very experimental for us. We've tried to have some resources. Here's a post that's just what to do if you've suffered harm. Request your medical records. Don't rely necessarily on a malpractice case because that doesn't work out for a lot of people. And then, ProPublica does also do a lot of deeper long-term investigative projects. So we featured some of that work here. And then another thing that we do a lot of are these sort of news applications, sort of interactive things. So here, we did something called Dialysis Facility Tracker. Does anyone want to suggest a zip code? Sorry? Oops. So what we've got here is a map of the facilities nearby. And then a bunch of metrics about each of the nearby dialysis facilities. We actually had to fight Medicare really hard to get them to give us this data at all, which might sound familiar to some of you assembled here. So that's one example of the sort of interactive thing we might do. Another thing that we have done we call it Nursing Home Inspect, and we have gotten Medicare, we've basically taken all of the Medicare nursing home inspection reports and made them digital so you can search them. So the example you see here, if I type in Caseyville, which is a town, and MRSA, which is a complication, you can search in states. And then the infractions are on a scale from A to L for some reason, where L is the most serious. So if we do this search, we come up with an inspection report, and you can click through, and there's a very narrative, long-form description of what happened when the inspector went to that nursing home and what they saw there. In this case, there was a MRSA outbreak in the nursing home, and the inspector saw the doctor using the same stethoscope on all of the patients, whether they had MRSA or not, which the inspector didn't like very much. And then at some point, the inspector goes up to the doctor and says, you realize you've been using the same stethoscope. And the doctor's like, whoops. Oops. And then later, the inspector goes back to the same doctor and says, have you cleaned that stethoscope yet? And she's like, oh, whoops again. So some interesting stuff in here, which is another resource. And then one other thing that we've had a lot of success with, so the last project I worked on was actually about foreclosures. And we heard from many, many people who had, had either lost their home, they felt wrongfully, or were in the process of losing their home. And we heard from so many, in fact, that we said we can't possibly write about all of these cases. So we did something we called the journalist matchmaker, which is that we basically built a database of people who had stories to tell, and then we let journalists kind of sign up as well. So if there's a journalist from Colorado who wanted to talk to a foreclosed person, we'd sort of set them up together. And I think that we'd like to do that for patient harm as well. There are so many people with such compelling stories. Not all of them are going to be right for ProPublica or CNN or whomever all the time, but there is quite possibly a reporter in Grand Junction who would love to talk to someone with a compelling story. So going back to the patient safety page, another thing we would love for people to participate in, we have these share your story links. And one thing that really helps us, both when we're using people's information and when we're passing it along to other journalists, is to make sure all the bases are covered. We have somebody's name, we have their contact information, we have a good summary of what happened, we know roughly where they are. So we've built kind of a portal where you can put in, this is the provider one. Where we kind of walk you through the information that would be useful for us to have if you're going to share your story. And I realize it looks kind of long, but if you have a good, thorough idea of what actually happened to someone, who they are, it's actually very helpful. So you can see we have these fields, and then what this spits out at the other end is actually a database of patients. If we get a really large number of patients, we can do, it's not exactly a survey because it's not random, but it can be incredibly helpful just to have numbers. If a body says no one ever complains, that's why we don't investigate anything, you can say, well, we have 700 people who say they filed a complaint, so we know what you're saying isn't true. But also, again, just to enrich all of our reporting, to help us find people who might be good to talk to. And patterns also emerge in what we hear from people. Like we're curious what happens if someone is harmed with regard to sort of the financial obligations. So we sort of were looking through, and we found that most people are required to pay for their own care, even if someone is at fault. They don't get a lot of sort of leeway. There's no, extra understanding extended, I guess I would say, when it comes to bills, even though the bills are higher than they would have been otherwise because of harm. So I think that is most of what I wanted to show. I want to take any questions from you, but also I've asked Regina to lock all the doors, and since I have you captive, I have this awesome focus group right here, and I would just like to kind of solicit brainstorming, suggestions. How can we make coverage of this issue better? What would you like to see? What do you hate to see? Over there.
I just want to thank you. I think it was like the first day that you tweeted out about the nursing home safety, and I have a 92-year-old friend in a nursing home, and it's like one of the best ones in our city, and they had a J, and they had an assault that was there, and they didn't report it for 5 days. So when I met with the administrator where my 92-year-old friend is, I had all the information, and I don't think he knew how much information I had. I even had what the patient said that was assaulted, how long it was before they got, they started reporting. I had the police report. So to be a good consumer and stuff, just me personally, I can't thank you enough.
Well, can you, before you run away from the microphone, can you just say a little bit more so I understand about how you use the information that you had?
Sure. I saw it, there's a gentleman, is there a Joe with ProPublica? And he put something about nursing home safety or how to look it up. And so I looked up the town that I live in, I looked in the state that I looked in, and I found that city, and they were on a J. How low do you go down, K?
I think, yes, L.
Right, so they were in immediate danger. For me to be able to meet with the administrator, I think there's a star system before, but when I had so much detailed information, it was really, really helpful for me.
Okay, great. Let's see. Anyone else? Suggestions, likes, dislikes? I mean, one other, oh, sure, go ahead. I'm not actually.
I'm not sure what the actual URL is, but it's Help a Reporter Out. And I know that I've actually subscribed to it for years so if somebody doing a health article is looking for, whatever, they might post a request out on this list and I see it. But you might want to sort of run your own, smaller version of that, where you have a listserv where patients and advocates would sign up, and if you're looking to do a story on medical harm or somebody that might have had an issue with X, Y, and Z, it hits your list of advocates that are willing to talk about it, and it sort of gives you a database of people to go to when you need stuff for stories. So, what's that? Yeah, it's very similar to that, but it's journalists to patients, where you're trying to match people like that. So,
one other question I'd like to ask. You've seen some of the things we've done, the dialysis facility thing, the inspection reports. What information, as patients, would it be useful to have, and what would the best way to be able to access that information be? Okay, something more specifically about doctors? Malpractice suits?
Malpractice, that's an obvious one. Another one we see, I'm from the diabetes community. There's a lot of times, especially when you see it a lot more in the, I'm trying to say how to say it. People leave their doctor's appointments in tears because, one, the doctor has made them feel guilty for not doing what they're supposed to be doing. They never take into account that compliance means that the treatment is actually working. Now, the patient might be doing everything right, but since it's not working, they obviously aren't. So it's, how can patients find that out? I mean, you can do it kind of word of mouth. It's easier with the internet now, but everybody's so scared to say anything because patients have gotten sued for expressing their opinions online about the care they received.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Steve Davis. So one of the things that we find, I'm a physician, One of the things that I get tons of calls on every week is patients who are trying to find a provider in their network, but the provider directory from the insurance company is inaccurate. It oftentimes has old, stale information that is sometimes years old. Back in 2007, the Maryland Psychological Association did a study where they did kind of a secret shopper survey of over 900 physicians in 7 health plans. And they found that 44% of the providers listed in the directory, they couldn't even find. The information was just wrong. Many of them were unable to set up appointments. And so I get patients, I'm a psychiatrist, and I get patients who call me sometimes in tears because, I work in a hospital setting, so I'm inpatient. I don't have any outpatients, but the insurance companies won't take me off their provider directory. And so patients are just calling and calling all these numbers. And oftentimes what I find is that something like 10 or 15% of the people listed in the directory are actually able to see the patient in a relatively soon time. So I think it just feels very fraudulent that insurance companies have this huge directory of providers when in fact it's really only 10 or 20%. And if there's anything that you could do to expose that, that would be fantastic.
MHNet here in Kansas City does exactly the same thing.
Also, we can only take about 2 more questions because we need to have the next speaker.
Good afternoon. How would you define slander when maybe like words to kind of stay away from when you're posting to your blog? That would maybe be a good idea. Maybe if you could have a list, of words to, I think someone mentioned something about you really don't, and sometimes you don't know what to say when you're writing your stories if you're going to, slander someone for being sued or something like that. That's a good.
I don't know if you'd be interested or willing to look into legal issues, but specifically since we don't have a national patient safety policy law in place, it would be helpful to know state by state where there is such legislation being proposed.
Okay, thank you everyone. Let's give a big round of applause for Olga. Yay!